Sick.
Hey guys, what's up? And welcome back to another episode of 1 Minute Breakdowns, where we break down each and every fight in a minute or less. At least we try to. Nothing more than 2 minutes, just so we can get you in and out of here quick enough. And this week we're joined by none other than LiamPicksFights. Liam, let the people know where they can find you and how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, brother. I can be found everywhere at LiamPicksFights talking about these fights. I gave my first look earlier this week on YouTube, but I'm coming back tomorrow with all my research done for the Bets and Banter panel with my guy Clint, Diehard MMA, and we'll see who else is going to be on the show as well. So exciting stuff, man. Excited
It's
to be
always
here
fun
talking
with
about these
Clint.
fights.
It's always
Oh,
fun.
you bet, man.
Shout out to the chat, those that are here early, Mushroom and Gordo, the friends of the show, both of them. I have a 1 minute mental breakdowns about 60 times a night. Nice. Very nice, Mushroom. And yes, you're right. Half horseman gang. You already know. Well, I say, Liam, let's go ahead and start breaking down these fights. And the first fight of the evening, we have Elvis Berner taking on Gurram Kutateladze. Gurram is a heavy favorite for those that have not checked the betting odds yet. He's going to be at a 1 inch height advantage, and the reach is even. Gurram will be 6 years older as well. And as always, Liam, go ahead and take us away.
Awesome. So I'll make this one quick, but I think, tomorrow on my show, I'm going to have a lot to offer on this fight because I think it's fascinating, right? You got a lightweight fight where Gurram Kutateladze is a minus 600 favorite. He has not yet been favored in a UFC fight. So he goes from being an underdog twice, coming 1-1 into this fight in the UFC, not very UFC experienced altogether, right? Elvis Berner, he's got one fight in the octagon. He's getting right back in here. So I feel like Elvis Berner is the play if you're going to be taking a money line side here, truthfully. I understand people have different styles of betting. I'm not a parlay guy. It's just not how I roll. And I think Gurram has to be a parlay leg or you can't really play him, right? He's not very economical for most people to be laying, 600 to win 100 on this fight. That being said, when I look at Elvis Berner, we have proof of concept. He went out there against Zubaira Tukhugov. He cashed in this exact same odds range. So he's been a dog. He was slept on. He came out there and got a win against a tough Russian that has a lot of acclaim. Differences are, we've got a Georgian warrior here, as my guy Clint likes to say. We've got a guy who's also, very dangerous on the feet, on the ground, can mix it up. But in the last fight, Tukhugov was denied the takedowns when he went for them. Most of the time, he didn't go for them at all. Berner attempted takedowns to clear off space from the cage. He showed a lot of ways of diffusing pressure. And for Gurram, he has not yet separated himself from an opponent widely in a fight. So for me, doesn't justify the minus 600, though he's a very talented and dangerous fighter.
Yeah, I agree with almost every point that you made, and I'm going to keep it short and simple with this fight. I just think Gurram is the much more complete fighter at this point, although he has pulled out of several fights, and we just don't know to an extent of what level he brings to the cage, even though he's fought some really good guys like Demir's Magulov, who's also fighting on this card. You just don't have a good sense of how this guy can pull away later on in fights. Now, I see a lot of people trying to look for angles here, whether they want to play the decision line, since he doesn't really tend to finish guys. But yeah, I do think Elvis Berner is very tough. I do think that he can fight close, and I do think the line is somewhat wide, but Gurram obviously being the deserved favorite. But at the end of the day, I do think Gurram wins this fight in one way or another. But moving on to the next one, we have Alexander Romanov versus Blago Ivanov. And before we even get into this one, I just want to ask, Liam, have you seen the hype tape that this guy put out?
Oh yeah, it was great, right? He probably didn't spend much money on that, I would think. Yeah, maybe he
No, he
sent that
probably
off
used
to
one of
his
those
nephew
apps.
or something. Yeah, he did. Oh, he did it himself on Clip Champ or whatever. I've been there, brother. I've been there. My old wrestling highlight tapes, they look the same. So God bless you.
In this matchup, we have Romanov, who is going to be 3 inches taller and will have a 2 inch reach advantage. He is also going to be the younger fighter here by 4 years. And I'll start this one off. Obviously, we know Romanov's cardio is a big issue and also his motivation at this point. But yeah, I think when he's fighting the the higher level competition, he somewhat succumbs to it, and he just does not want to fight up to that level and does not want to train hard enough because he feels like he will lose. Now, Blagoy obviously is known to be a super durable guy and has some decent takedown defense, but as we all know, in the heavyweight division, we're not really a division with good wrestlers. We have not seen how Blago is off his back. He doesn't really offer too much in the limited takedown tape that he has on him. And I just don't see him getting up if Romanov does take him down. And to be honest, I think if Romanov lands one takedown, this thing might be over. I'm not saying that Blago is going to get knocked out by any means, but there's something called a TKO, and the ref has to stop after a certain amount of unanswered strikes. So I ultimately lean Romanov in this fight. Liam, what do you think?
Wiz, I actually agree with you. And I thought I was going to be a little bit unconventional in saying I actually think that Alexander Romanov, keep in mind, I am 5-0 on my bets, for and against Alexander Romanov. So far I've done a decent job picking this guy's fights. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Let's be very clear. So I could get this one wrong. But my gut level read when I saw this fight, and I first had to look right into the social media, right? Because we know this guy can show up flaky, can show up a little bit, with all due respect, fat, and just not prepared, which is what happened against Volkov. I bet Volkov there. I bet, Tybura against him, just because Tybura, he's a really stingy matchup for most heavyweights, and he can actually grapple. He can strike decent on the feet. That probably should have been a draw, but we'll cash it, of course. And we also had Leon and Angelus in the parlay that night. So it just slammoed $14 to win 500. Y'all must have forgot. But the thing is, when I look at this fight, I say to myself, Blagoy's getting taken down by anybody who wants to take him down, basically. He does a good job getting back up to his feet. Most guys don't try and take him down. It's heavyweight. But I feel like Romanov's going to try and take him down. He's been training in the US of A, not in Moldova, okay? Which, by the way, why was I betting on Volkov last time? Because my dude's training in Moldova, showing up fat as a house, and didn't look like he took it very seriously. He said in interviews, if you listen to him, he was like, guys, I left my old training camp. I used to have a training camp. I don't have it anymore. He left. He went somewhere else, which was training by himself with a couple buddies and whatever at the local wrestling gym. He looked terrible. This fight, he moved to the United States. He's been training in Maryland. He's been training with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts. He's been training with guys. He's been training for events, grappling and such. I feel like he's actually showing up more prepared for this fight. I would wait to see the weigh-in. I think Romanov's going to get him to the ground. I think from there he's going to have his way. The cardio is a concern, but I think you could buy off at a better price on Blago after round one in all likelihood, and I just think it's very likely he gets finished here if he's underneath in the first minute.
I love it. Yeah, I'm glad that we have the same read on this fight, because this has been quite a controversial one. I mean, the only other fight on this card that I've seen so many people on an underdog in is, to be quite frank, the Max Griffin fight. So it's Ivanov and Max Griffin, who are the mushes of the week, is what they like to call them. But regardless, we have another fight that might not be as competitive at all. We have Joanderson Brito going up against Weston Wilson. Weston Wilson's coming out on short notice. Joanderson Brito is going to be the younger fighter by 6 years. He is going to be at is that 3? Nope, can't do math. 4-inch height disadvantage and a 1-inch reach disadvantage. I think this is a very binary fight. Although Weston Wilson has some anthropomorphic advantages here. I did steal that one from you, Liam, sorry. But it's hard seeing him winning against a vet like Brito. I think it's just a matter of if we think Brito wins via KO or sub, in my opinion, and that's all I have to say about this fight. What do you think, Liam?
Yeah, Wilson's coming in here with more fights on paper, right? But just it's the quality of fights. We always talk about the quality of competition. And I feel like, Bill Algea is a much more skilled and well-rounded version of the body type that Brito's going to be experiencing here. It's not like he's normally the bigger featherweight. He normally comes in with a little bit smaller size in terms of the measurables. His reach is okay, but he comes in with, huge power intangibles, a lot of physicality, a lot of intensity. I had a poster growing up that I hung in my room for a while I was wrestling, said intensity. That's what it takes to be a champion. Joanderson Brito has a lot of freaking intensity, my guy. He comes out there trying to take people's head off. And so when that doesn't work, sometimes he kind of throws himself into the ground. He just burns himself out going for the kill. But I think in this kind of fight, he's got an opponent who's not fought at this level, who's not going to be prepared, I don't think, for an opponent of this kind of skill. And he's been around the game for a long time. He's got a lot of good training rounds. He seems like a nice guy. I think he could win fights in the UFC. But when you look at the way he's lost regionally, when you look at the style of fights that he loses, Joanderson Brito fits the bill of a guy that you think would kill him regionally. And I think that Joanderson Brito would beat a lot of the guys that beat him. So I like Joanderson Brito. And I actually have a preference. You said, is it a KO or is it a sub? I think a lot of people are going to go with the KO here. And I understand why, because he's got a lot of power and this guy has been shinned before. But I think Brito is just really dangerous on the ground. And I feel like Bill Algeo doesn't get enough credit for just being an insanely stingy grappler, so hard to finish. He got back taken for several minutes in that fight, if I remember. I have to revisit some tape, but just I remember as a Brito backer in that fight thinking like, man, Brito's doing a good job, but it's going to be close. It's probably not going to go our way. Went back to the window with Andre Fili as the opponent, and you guys know how that story ended. So Joanderson Brito, the days of getting him at plus 250, I think are gone, but I do believe that Joanderson Brito is going to win this fight by submission in round 1.
There you go. And I think the submission line is it gives you a little bit more than the knockout line. I think the knockout line is at plus 105, and then submission was close to around plus 185 last I checked. I think that was yesterday evening, California time. But yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be getting to the window with either of those. It's a flip of a coin to me. But next up, we have Ivana Petrovic going up against Luana Carolina. Luana Carolina is going to be the older fighter by a year. She's going to be at a 2-inch height disadvantage, where we usually don't see her being at a height disadvantage. And then also she's going to be at a almost 2-inch reach disadvantage. Liam, take us off with this one.
Sure. The last thing I was doing was eating Chinese food and watching Petrovic tape before we got on the air here. And,
made you sick to your stomach.
I came away thinking, Petrovic lost the second round in the fight against Takano, something like that. Forgive me. It's in my notes, guys. I'll review back. But overall, I felt like in some fights, she looked like she had really good takedowns. In other fights, her takedowns looked okay. She didn't seem super insistent for them. She does seem like she's hittable. I think an opponent with more power would give her a lot of problems, especially in a UFC debut. Do I think that she's reliable chalk? I think that's an aggressive position. It's not to say I don't think she's going to win this weekend, but I do think that there's a little bit of wait and see approach that you want to take to prospects like this, because it's not like she was blowing everybody out of the water. She was having competitive fights. She got dropped regionally as well. But what I liked about her game, what I think is going to make her win this fight, is that I don't think she is looking for takedowns, to win rounds. I don't believe that. I think she's looking for takedowns to win fights and finish people. And I like that about her. We've seen a couple quick transitions to finishes on the mat. We've seen that when she gets to the top position, she passes quickly. And I like that about her. So I think that Luana Carolina, the difference was against Lupi. Lupi likes to take people down over and over and over and kind of win fights that way, maybe take it to 15 minutes, mix it up a little bit on the feet. That didn't work for her there. She just went for the same takedowns and didn't get them. I think Petrovic will be willing to mix it up on the feet, mix up the game, and I think she will find different takedown opportunities. And if she gets it down once or twice, I think she'll pass and finish.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think laying chalk on Ivana Petrovic is going to be my favorite bet if you were to ask me on this card. It's also tough to back someone like Luana because she doesn't really offer too much off of her back. Not saying that Ivana is an ace by any means on the mat, but she does have some solid ground skills in general, just hunting the subs. I think
the ground and pound too. I forgot to mention that was the thing that stands out is the reason she could pass is she's punching women in the face. So she punches them in the face, she passes the guard, and then she throws again. That's what I loved. Excuse me.
No, you're fine. I think that's one of the more underrated skills when it comes to ground game because a lot of people try to go for and hunt submissions and try to pass guard without even throwing a simple 1-2 or just a couple of ground strikes because that makes it so much easier. The pain itself allows the human body to move unconventionally in ways that we don't want it to move. And if you have a couple of solid ground and pound like strikes, you're going to find someone curling up or moving into a direction that is more favorable for you. So, yeah, I think Petrovic can find success with the takedowns. It's her main game plan, in my opinion. And the striking holes are pretty apparent in her game. But, yeah, this fight, from a betting standpoint, as the number is pretty wide, I'm not really too interested. But I do think that Luana, the people that are backing Luana here at a dog, I don't tend to agree with it. So I think Ivana is going to win probably inside the distance here. Maybe the under at plus money, depending on where it's at. But I also just don't like playing unders on women's MMA, so I'm just gonna pass on this one. Moving on to the next one, we have another women's MMA fight. It's Siana Santos going up against Carol Rosa. Siana Santos is going to be 3 inches taller, and she's going to have a 1-inch reach advantage here. She's also the older fighter by 5 years. Breaking this one down, I thought that Iana, she feels as good as done at this point. I mean, you don't know where her motivation is after the 2 back-to-back losses, and I think Rosa is going to look for takedowns here at a decent clip. Where I think Iana is going to shine is probably the cage and clinch control, because that's her main game plan. Both of these ladies, as a matter of fact. But if it is ever at distance, I think Rosa is the much cleaner striker and the much faster striker. I do think that Rosa is probably going to hunt these takedowns and look for ground and pound opportunities and end up winning a unanimous decision in this spot. And I do like the price. I mean, when it first opened around that minus 200, I was not about it. And then it got bought all the way down to minus 155. And I'm like, okay, asking myself some questions. Yeah, Rosa has never really separated herself in her past couple of fights and has fought really close. But, I mean, the competition was a little bit different back then. I mean, Norma Dumont, definitely a bigger girl who's known for this nasty cage push. So I just think Carol Rosa is going to get it done through the striking. What do you think, Liam?
Yeah, this is a fight that is a little bit uninspiring. I remember being at UFC Columbus yelling, "Elbows, Carol, elbows!" And she's just not getting off on enough in round 3 to get the stoppage there. So I think that, Carol Rosa, she doesn't have a defining finish in the UFC. I think that's why she hasn't broken out as a prospect. Also stifled a little bit at 145, which is where this fight is going to be taking place for whatever reason, for as long as this division still contests fights. But, when I look at Carol Rosa, I feel like she's a fighter that's still trying to put it all together, that's still trying to figure out her game, that still wants to be there. And like you mentioned, we don't really know exactly how motivated Iana is to be out there, getting taken down easily by Holly Holm, who's in her late 40s. This is a 27-year-old woman in front of her, who's obviously not as skilled as Holly Holm, but she's 27, right? And she's a lot fresher and just seems like she wants to be in there more with a little bit more vigor. So I think this is an interesting spot. I respect that there's a lot of money coming in on the Iana Santos side. That's making me curious. I almost want to see the weigh-in, see if Carol Rosa's got a beer gut, just showing up half for the paycheck. But, if everything checks out, I feel like Carol Rosa is probably the side here. And the one thing that stands out about Santos' record is that she gets finished a lot in her losses. Holly Holm, not really a fan of finishing anything. So I feel like, Carol Rosa, the UFC is going to be in the back like, hey, go get a finish or maybe we don't keep booking you in these fights. And she's like, okay. And I think she does.
As our boy Mushroom would say, Holly Holm can barely finish her lunch. So that's going to be on to the next one here since, I don't think there's too much to break down on this one specifically. I think it's all going to be dependent on how Carol Rosa shows up. And I think she has the advantage in the skill set overall. But next up, we have a very intriguing fight with Kevin Lee, the return, going up against Renato Fakhretdinov. Renato Fakhretdinov is going to be the older fighter here by a year. He's going to be 3 inches taller and then at a 3-inch reach disadvantage. Now, as I mentioned, the return of Kevin Lee to the UFC. Last time out, he fought Diego Sanchez. Looked pretty bad, in my opinion. But then there were the rumors of him tearing his ACL in the first round of that fight. So I guess you got to give him a little bit of a pass there. But that is also a concern due to how severe the injury is. When you tear an ACL, it's not the easiest thing to come back from. And then coming back up a weight class here, not at lightweight, he's fighting at welterweight. Renat is a strong grappler, nasty ground and pound. We saw him last time out against Brian Battle, and he multiple 10-8 rounds. It was a very impressive performance. I think the striking of Renat is pretty underrated, in my opinion, for the division. And while Kevin Lee is a wrestler himself, I think that size disadvantage is going to do him a disservice here. And the strength disadvantage is going to be very apparent, I think, in this fight. Last point. I mean, Lee is a good hammer, just not a good nail. I think Renat wins this via decision, takedown spree. What do you think, Liam?
This is a tricky fight for me because I like Renat. You know, I bet him against Brian Battle. I thought that was a great spot. I think this is a lot tougher though. You know, Brian Battle is a guy who's still coming into his own. You know, that was his first fight, I believe, at welterweight. I think Renat, maybe it was his second fight or something at welterweight. So both, or, you know, at least in the UFC level, I believe Renat was a former middleweight. So big guy. That's one thing to take note of here. And I think you mentioned that well. But I think on Kevin Lee's front here, it's kind of a do or die type of spot for him. I feel like it's a really important fight for his career. Renat, you know, one thing that's interesting is he said, you know, I never want to fight a Muslim brother. You know, I never want to do that. And, you know, he said the UFC basically strong armed him into this fight where they're like, yeah, take this fight. And he's like, okay, I got to fight my brother, like whatever. Because if you guys aren't aware, Kevin Lee converted to Islam. And so he's been getting some of the Dagestani rub, and he's been hanging out with some of the Khabibs and these guys along the way, including that Eagle FC run. But training at Kill Cliff FC, training with a lot of good guys along the way. Seems like Kevin Lee has invested in himself. You know, can you deny that this guy's gone around and sought out the best training and really tried to apply himself? You know, I think he's done a lot of things right. The question is, does it matter? You know, because he's a guy who's a former 55er, kind of got caught in between weight classes, was hoping to get into a 65 division, doesn't have one. So at 170, can he make it work against a big guy? They're going to find out on this very first fight. And I think that he can. You know, I think he's a very good wrestler and grappler, especially when he can be on top. If he could stuff some takedowns. I feel like Brian Battle is just too long, lanky, and awkward. And I felt like it was obvious he was going to get barreled over there by Renat when he wanted them. And also Brian's striking is still a work in progress. You know, he went tit for tat with Trayshawn Gore for 15 minutes, right? So it's not like he's blowing anybody away. He's still got less than 12 professional fights. But, you know, Kevin Lee, he's fought the best guys in the division. He's fought the best guys in the world. He's fought champions before they were champions. So it's like a lot of these losses, you know, they don't look great, but then you're like, man, he fought a really murderous row of guys. Whereas Renat, his best 3 wins are like Andreas Michailidis. What's the guy's name? Eric Spicely. You know, it's like, what are we doing here? You know, the guys that you've heard of from the UFC that he's beaten, they're not that high level and they're not as experienced as him. Whereas Kevin is some of those things. So the question is, can he do it at 170? I think that there's a little bit of value on Kevin Lee, but I also don't like how he implodes late in fights. I bet Daniel Rodriguez, I bet a bunch of guys against him, but I do think, you know, Charles Oliveira thought about quitting in the Kevin Lee fight. And y'all can go back and check for yourself and see if you disagree with me. But I feel like at points in that fight, he was like, wow, I'm getting out grappled. I'm getting outworked here. This is starting to like break me. But then Kevin broke more and he just got tired and he got finished. I don't think that Renat is the most dangerous finisher. You know, he does have a lot of finishes, but we haven't seen that materialize at the UFC level against these guys that offer real resistance. You know, I feel like Kevin could give him some problems here, especially if he's defending takedowns early. So give me the Motown Phenom reluctantly.
And I completely understand where you're going with that one. I mean, Kevin Lee is not a random fighter. I think this is Renat's biggest test to date. So we'll have to wait and see how this fight plays out. That's all we can say. Next up, we have Nursultan Ruzaboyev. I know that's a hard one. Going against Bruno Ferreira. Bruno is going to be the older fighter by a year. He is going to be the shorter fighter by 5 inches. And we don't really have reach information on this guy, Nursultan. He's also coming in on short notice, just for those who were not aware. Also going up a weight class, his usual weight class is welterweight. I think I got to be pretty confident in Bruno in this spot. When you look at the tape of Nursultan, there's a couple of things. Very slow striker, decent technique, I gotta say, but it just seems like he gets taken down by a gust of wind. The level of competition has been pretty low. And when you look at his last fight, he got taken down and he was getting controlled for the most part. And then it looked like the guy just gave him the Kimura. So there's allegations in multiple of his fights of fight fixing by his opponents. And that's not a good look as well. When you look at Bruno, sure, maybe not the best of competition either, but definitely has big power, has good wrestling, and will definitely be the better grappler here. Out of his 10 wins, all of them have come inside the distance. 7 knockouts, 3 submissions. And yeah, I just think Bruno gets this done inside the distance. Props to those that got him around -160. chopping that money line down from minus 190, minus 200 to minus 150 on the inside the distance. I think that's a pretty generous cut given that all of his fights professionally have ended inside the distance. So, yeah, Rizabov just gives me fraud vibes here. What do you think, Liam?
You know, the thing that stood out to me the most, because I was thinking to myself, a guy who doesn't really fight the full 15 minutes more often than not in Ferreira, maybe he could be exploited by a guy who's got so many fights, who's been around a long time. And then I start looking through the record and I'm like, man, this guy can't win a decision, right? He's barely, got any decision wins. He's gone to decision a bunch of times, more often than not, he's dropping those. So do I think he's like a lock to get this decision if it goes 15? Do I think it's more likely that Ferreira completely gasses than this guy? I'm not really too sure. So I think that, the guy who's more naturally powerful and a little bit more dangerous is Ferreira. I think the guy who's more likely to get takedowns on his taller opponent here is Ferreira. So, yeah, I just think that Ferreira's deciding this matchup more often than not. But there's a lot of unknowns here as well. So, early prices, I get why people would come in, more about the Ferreira side at the UFC level, at least has a win over RoboCop, which I think could age really well. But for this other guy, he's got a ton of fights coming in. So I don't really want to count him out, but, just hasn't seemed like he's beaten anybody good in all these fights that he's had. So Ferreira until further notice.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just tough. I mean, both of these guys have a lot of unknowns, but definitely don't want to bet on someone who's been accused of facing people with fight fixing in the headlines. So, yeah, I'm definitely staying away from Nurselton at least. Next up, we have Benoit Saint Denis going up against Ismail Bonfim. Benoit Saint Denis is going to be 3 inches taller. He's going to be at a 2-inch reach advantage here, and also, actually, no, they're the same age. Liam, why don't you kick us off with this one?
All right, I might sound like a broken record, but I think we got a live underdog in this one. Truthfully, I bet Bonfim in his last fight. I bet him by knockout. I thought that Terrence McKinney was a knockout, a vicious, bad knockout waiting to happen. He's a fun fighter, but he's an action fighter. He swangs and bangs in the pocket. His grappling has been proven against the likes of Fares Ziam. What does that tell us? I don't know. So I think that he's still very much an unknown. But what we do know for sure is that he gasses out in about 6 minutes or less in most of his fights. So I was thinking to myself, Bonfim, his cardio, maybe not a selling point, but definitely better than McKinney. I was like 1,000%. And I also trust him not to quit more than McKinney if it got tough. Now, McKinney, like I said, talented guy, can still put it all together, but just a couple of mental roadblocks he's got to overcome. Some changes to his style, perhaps, that he's got to make. Benoit Saint Denis is a murderer. He comes forward with reckless abandon. He will hit you with his fists. He will get on top of you. He will try and choke you unconscious. He will try and break your arm. He's a vicious guy. He's a tough guy to deal with, and he could take a hellacious beating and keep coming forward. I think it's arguably he won the 3rd round against my guy, Elvis Zaleski dos Santos, who I puked in my hands when he didn't cash my ITD bets. But what I'm saying is this. That guy, Vladislav, whatever his name is, he stole from us, and that's okay. But what we know about this guy is that you have to put him down with a shovel. You got to put this guy under the octagon to finish him. And I think that for Bonfim, he hasn't been tested in a long time on the mat. He hasn't been tested by a guy who is a former 170-pounder coming down. And he's a big, big son of a gun, man. At 155, nobody's been able to deal with him. I'm curious to see if Bonfim can, but I think that the pricing is very aggressive. And we see a guy go from being a slight dog to being a massive favorite against a similar archetype who's a bigger fighter and who has more cardio and more chin and more heart. And is a former special ops guy who's probably been subjected to all kinds of different mental performance enhancements and physical performance enhancements and everything else along the way. So, I wouldn't be surprised if Benoit shows up with some things still stuck in his ass like Bonfim, and they have a grand old time out there. But it's going to be the Juice Bowl, and I think plus 260 is a little wide.
Yeah, I mean, I think Denis is an absolute warrior. He never backs down and uber tough. I think it may serve him wrong here, though. He has pretty poor striking defense and eats every punch. It's pretty ridiculous. It's sub 40%, I believe, the striking defense. And against a guy who carries as much power as Bonfim, it's kind of scary. The wrestling is going to be pretty interesting, as I think Denis may have some success here. I do believe Bonfim gets back up and uses his grappling, but the one commonality that we've seen is when Denise gets his takedowns denied and his opponents defend them, he tends to gas out pretty quick. And that's the question mark. Is Bonfim going to be able to defend the takedowns? Now, he defended them against Terrence McKinney, but McKinney is not really known to take people down all that often, even though he's been in the wrestling room with the likes of Michael Chiesa. So I think if Bonfim is able to defend these takedowns, he probably cruises and probably wins inside the distance. I would rather say later, probably end of second round towards the third round, just because of how tough a guy like Denise is. Unless Bonfim comes out here and nukes him and proves us all wrong. But until then, we don't really have too much to go by when it comes to the durability of Denise, him being cracked at all. But I think at some point in the near future, that durability, similar to Vettori, he's similar to Vettori archetype, where he'll eat everything and still continue walking forward. It might do him a disservice. But until then, we'll see. Next up, we have Ariane Lipsky going up against Melissa Gatto. Ariane Lipsky is going to be 2 years older in this matchup. She's going to be at a 1-inch height advantage and a 2-inch reach disadvantage. And she's training out of King's MMA this time out. I have not seen her there at all, so maybe the one in Huntington Beach. But Lipsky's striking, I would say, is just okay. I don't think she possesses the power that Gatto has. And on top of that, in the grappling, I think it's just going to be a nightmare for her. Gatto's the stronger girl in all aspects of MMA. Her takedown game is solid. I think her power is going to serve her well in this matchup, especially in striking. And her ground and pound's pretty nasty. I think the grappling will be her easiest path to victory here if she's looking for those subs once she takes Lipsky down. I think I would pretty much label Lipsky as a fish out of water on the mat. We've just seen it too much. So I'm interested in Gatto inside the distance if it was a better number. We have a couple of days to see how this number switches up. But yeah, I think Melissa Gatto is, even though I'm not really confident when it comes to women's MMA, we're always surprised with these matchups. I think this one is a good line at -200 for Gatto. What do you think, Liam?
It's an interesting one, because I definitely agree with you. I think Gatto's the superior ground player, but it seems to me from an Instagram stock that Lipsky took some of the right steps. I think she's gotten some training in American Top Team. I think she's gotten some training with Wagner Rocha. So, a lot of good names along the way. The thing is, she's got a big gap to shore up. The one thing is Gatto not always looking for the takedowns, sometimes a little bit content to hang back on the feet and look for her shot. She's a powerful striker, but there's a concept Luke Thomas talked about called single shot high variance. And I feel like a lot of fighters in the UFC kind of fit that mold. I think Gatto kind of fits that mold as well, where she's picking a big kick and she wants to throw it and take your head off, things like that. And eventually it works in a lot of her fights. But I also think there's a propensity to let somebody who's a little bit more rhythmic and likes to attack with a little bit more, combination work like Lipsky. I think that's where this could be a little bit interesting if the fight goes to the cards, because Gatto doesn't tend to do very much, but I do think she's the more dangerous fighter. I do think Lipsky's the more fragile of the two. So for those reasons, I understand, why you like Gatto here. But for me, I have some reluctance to play this fight because I do think Lipsky's got a little bit of momentum coming in here. And for Gatto, she did high roll that injury win over Leonardo, a couple things along the way where she wasn't throwing a ton of volume in those fights either. And so judging, has been a complete disaster, in my opinion, this year. And for a fight like this, where I think Gatto's got some finishing upside, but if it goes to the cards, I think the -200 will be a little shaky. That would be my opinion. I wonder what the finish only market is.
I can pull that up right now, as a matter of fact, because that does seem like a good shout. And there's another fight on this card that we'll be breaking down soon, where I think the finish only is, or scorecards no action is a solid look. Let's see. Bear with me here.
How ironic that the Queen of Violence were like trying to find ways to angle for her decision, only.
Yeah, so goes distance no action for Melissa Gatto is -600.
Oh, just that? All right.
Yeah, horrible.
Everybody just pull out 6 Benjis just in case. I'll
And then
pass.
she
I'll
gets finished.
pass.
And then she gets
Yeah, I was gonna say exactly. And then she literally throws one kick like Tom Aspinall and just falls backwards, and you're like, this sport is stupid.
Well, she was sporting a black eye in her media day today. So,
yo, dude, you're not playing. And that for me is another big red flag. When we're talking about a favorite of minus 200 and you're wearing damage on the way in,
we'll have to see. Next up, we have Max Griffin going up against Michael Morales. Michael Morales, undefeated. He's going to be at a 1-inch height advantage, and then we'll have 3 inches of reach. He's also going to be the youngest fighter when it's in terms of age gap here. 13 years. I'm telling you, math right now is really off for me. 13-year age gap here between Morales and Griffin. Griffin is much older, as I mentioned. Carries a lot of power, though. Getting up there in age, and also I just hate it when almost everyone I see in the community picks someone as an underdog pick, similar to Lucas Almeida a couple weeks ago. And I feel like we're getting similar vibes here. I think Morales' youth is going to be too much for Griffin, who has been hurt in his past couple of fights. Not saying that he's been finished, but he has been dropped multiple times, and he does let his opponents somewhat dictate the fight. But so does Morales. Morales is not the cleanest with his striking. He also lets his opponents dictate the fight, more of a counter striker. If I were forced to bet on this fight, it would be Griffin at the price, but with zero confidence. So I'm staying away, and I just advise not to parlay Morales just because this one could get really close. Liam, what do you think?
Yeah, to echo my earlier sentiments, I'm not a big parlay guy, right? So Morales is probably not going to make his way to my card this weekend. But let me make the case for Max Griffin before telling you why I like Morales to win the fight ultimately. The case for Max Griffin is he could arguably be on a 6-fight win streak, realistically, right? He lost to Alex Oliveira via split decision. I don't know if it was split or unanimous against Neil Magny. I was at that fight in person. Maybe I was watching through my green-colored glasses because I did have a bet on Max Griffin, big bet as an underdog. I thought he won that fight. I thought he beat Neil Magny. I thought he nearly knocked him out in the first round. I thought it was an arguable 10-8. So I was like, a little bit surprised by the outcome there. But, if he had won that fight, he's on a 5-fight win streak. If he got the split decision against Cowboy Oliveira, he's on a 6-fight win streak. So at 37 years of age, he's certainly been showing a better form in recent performances. But the cardio is the real concern for me because, number one, cardio is the thing that can drop off overnight. Number two, we're talking about a guy in Morales who kind of comes on a little bit stronger late in the fight. First round, he did well against Fugit. Then he started to slow down a little bit. In the second round, he kind of took his foot off the gas, let Fugit back into the fight. Round 3, he goes out there and gets the finish. I feel like he's the kind of guy that can ramp it back up if the fight starts to get away from him in the first or the second round. So I feel like Max Griffin by KO at plus 600 and above and stuff like that, I understand why people would come in on that side. They're like, man, this kid's young. He hasn't been tested that much. Max Griffin's got a big punch. No, really, I couldn't make an argument against that. I thought he almost knocked out Neil Magny, like I just said, who's a much more experienced guy. But Morales is a young guy with a young chin. I think he could recover if he gets hurt. And I think it's more likely that if Max gets hurt here, he can't recover. Than if Morales gets hurt here, I think he could recover. So I think that's why he's favored. But again, it's just too aggressive a price. And you don't need to play every fight every time. So I think, I have a slight lean towards the fight doesn't go to decision. And that's probably a gross price as well. But Max Griffin's a tough guy. He's game and he's really well schooled. So I can't really say many bad things about him, just that I don't like the visuals for him in round 3 against a kid like this.
Yeah, the one thing that's interesting to me is Morales tends to get rocked before he wins his fights. And I don't know if he's going to be able to take a punch of that caliber from Max Griffin. He hits hard. And he's the type of guy that will capitalize on those mistakes. But it should be an interesting one. I personally am staying away. But next up, we have the second to last fight, the co-main event, Damir Magulov going up against Grant Dawson. Damir Magulov is going to be the older fighter by 3 years. He's going to be same height, and then 2-inch reach advantage for Damir. And I'll kick this one off. We do not know if this is Damir's retirement fight. He mentioned earlier in the year that he was retiring due to injury and family issues. Can't put too much stock into that anymore, as in a recent interview, he was speaking about how he planned to take over the division and beat everyone in the top 10. So what does that give me an indication of? That this guy is not really going to be retiring after this. The one thing that a lot of people have picked up on is in his fights, he has a little bit of a twitch that he does in the stand-up, and that could be what he was suffering with. And hopefully, is if that was it, he recovered and found the proper treatment. I do think Damir is miles ahead in the striking here. That's just being honest. And he's lost to Arman Sarukian. Losing to Arman Sarukian is not a bad beat at all. This guy is in the title contention. If Dawson isn't able to land takedowns here, he's going to get very tired and very taxed cardio-wise. And Damir's just going to be able to handle him. So ultimately, early in the week, I was leaning Dawson. But after these interviews and him saying that he's not thinking of retirement at all anymore, I do lean Damir. I think he's going to be able to get this done and show why I think this line is a little bit disrespectful. Liam, do you agree?
This is a weird one, man, because the line movement has been quite aggressive. Opens a -165. It's a pick 'em right now. Looks like it's very possible this line will flip by fight time. And I think Grant Dawson is a guy who's been favored in every UFC fight. He's won or drawn in every UFC fight, 7-0-1. And he's done a pretty decent job, but you look at the road along the way, and while he has some good names and some good finish wins included, he just hasn't always looked clean in every performance. And I think that against Magulov, that leaves the door open. But do I feel inspired to bet on guys who are a little bit older in the division, talking about retirement? Think about Zalgas, right? Everybody got re-inspired to play him, right? In the last iteration, I ended up playing Josh Van after I said on my first look show that I was like, I assume Zalgas is going to win. But then when I watched Van, I was like, man, it's a 21-year-old kid who looks like he's got a lot of piss and vinegar and he wants to be there. And Zalgas is like 50-50 on whether he wants to be there. I feel like Damir's the same way right now. And I feel like he did a good job in his last fight negating stuff and not letting stuff happen. But I just felt like he didn't necessarily want to impose his offense. And even in fights where Elvis, these kind of names that he really should be cleaning up and putting away a little bit at the UFC level, tough guys, good guys, but guys he's way more talented than. He's keeping it within the margins. He's letting them have a chance. He's getting hit in those fights. It's a little bit scary to me. So I do think Grant Dawson's the guy who's coming on. And I think he's the guy who projects higher in the division. In terms of who's going to get to that title fight eventually, I don't think it's Damir. I think it is more likely it's Grant Dawson. But is he ready right now? This is a big step up. I bet Ricky Glenn plus 400. I thought it was the best bet I ever made. If this goes to a significant plus number, I'll have to get in on Damir like I did last time in a close competitive fight at plus money. But at a pick'em price, I don't really feel compelled to play it because you got one guy talking about retirement and one guy who's been working harder with better people. So distance himself from James Krause, go to American Top Team, only good for your EV. So I think Grant Dawson's made a lot of the right decisions. He went from being a guy who I faded in round 3 to coming back and finishing Jared Gordon in round 3. But this is a guy who's a similar sized lightweight who's even bigger than him. And I don't think he's got the striking advantage at all. So unless he knocks out Damir, I think he's going to be drawn dead on the feet. But on the ground, he's a sticky son of a bitch, and he's really awkward. Different style than Arman. Arman likes to take people down, take them down 5 times. That's what he kind of does. Whereas Grant Dawson's trying to stick to you and trying to get one opportunity to finish. I think he could do that here in the 3rd round as well. So I think either one of these guys, round 3 or decision, is kind of the way to play him. You can get Damir like plus 125, plus 135, round 3 or decision. And then Grant Dawson, I think, would be an even higher price. I would kind of look that way on this fight.
Yeah, this is a really close fight. And I personally wouldn't advise anyone to bet on it unless, as you mentioned, Damir gets to that big plus money odds. And it's just crazy how this line is flipped. It's mainly due to those retirement talks. But again, the interviews today proved me wrong. Last but not least, we have Sean Strickland going up against Abus Magomedov. Sean Strickland is going to be, or they're going to be the same age. Abus is going to be 1 inch taller, and then he's going to have a 2-inch reach advantage here. Liam, kick us off for this final fight.
Another interesting, well-matched fight. We've got a middleweight headliner here. Sean Strickland, very active compared to a very inactive Abus Magomedov. I don't know what role that will play in the fight, but I think it's an interesting note. Sean Strickland, many UFC main events, absorbs a lot of head strikes. Not a guy who fights optimally, in my view. If you look at his record as a favorite, he's 7-3. at about a 70% indication on average, which means you're not making money betting on this guy. You're just, hoping to get it back every time with him. I do think that Sean Strickland has times when he's a good bet, minus 200 and above. He's kind of been very solid, just beating Jack Hermanson, turning back these mid-tier guys. Who is this Abus Magomedov that most people haven't heard of, that most people aren't as familiar with, that most casual UFC fans are scratching their head, and the line's coming all this way? Is it because his name's Magomedov? I do think that's a reasonable argument. He is from Germany, right? Let's be very clear about that, right? Where he's fighting out of, but by way of Dagestan. And he's got all the brothers, supporting him. And he's got pictures with John Jones and all these guys along the years. So he's not a slouch. And here's something that I'll leave you guys with on this fight, which is he reminds me, in terms of how this has all come together, of Yuri Prohaska. Come in, get a big, shiny finish. You come from an overseas market. People already know who you are. One chance at the elite against a guy we think you could beat. I think that Sean Strickland could win this fight. The longer it goes, the more likely he is to win the fight. I think you'd have to favor him to do it. But the problem is Sean Strickland fights like an idiot. He does not fight like a person with a brain. He has skills in every position. He knows how to grapple. He knows how to wrestle. He knows how to kickbox. But he chooses to box with very basic tools and engage in exchanges on the feet, which is negative EV. So if you bet into big favorite prices, you're playing games and you're playing stupid games, and you're probably going to win stupid prizes at a rate that's going to make it not a good bet. So I think Sean Strickland, maybe the line flips, maybe it goes to pick him. Okay. But when I'm looking at this on paper, I say to myself, you got one guy with upside, and I think it's Abus Magomedov. I think he's more likely to win this fight by knockout. I think he's more likely to attempt takedowns and submissions. He came into the UFC, he said, I'm going to take out Israel Adesanya. Yo, y'all see a lot of middleweight contenders around that anybody gives a flying shit about? Me neither. So they're fast-tracking him like they did Yuri, like they did a bunch of other guys. Is it going to work? Well, we'll find out on Saturday, but I know who the UFC wants to win, and it's not the guy who's talking about women not being in the workforce.
Way to leave that one off. Yeah, I mean, we know how Sean fights. He comes forward relentlessly and has no regard for what comes his way. He has fought the top of the division, but the reason why Abus is fighting so high up is nobody's accepting fights against him. This man has had multiple fights get dropped, and multiple people in the top 10 refuse to fight him, just due to the sheer power and the skill that he has. I think Abus is definitely going to have the early finishing threat. His kickboxing power is going to translate well into his game when it comes to Strickland, who just powers forward constantly with no regard, as you were mentioning. If this gets to the later rounds, we'll have a question of whether Abus's cardio is legit or not. I think the best way to play this fight is going to be looking at Abus scorecards equals no action, because I definitely think he can finish Strickland, and Strickland hasn't finished a fight in 7 fights. Brennan Allen 3 years ago. So
at 195, and I've noted too, I forgot to mention, that's a great point, at above 185, this guy is aces, beats up Imavov, beats up Brendan Allen, looks the best he ever has. When he comes back to 185, for whatever reason, he looks a lot more human.
Exactly. And the reason why scorecards no action instead of the money line is I just don't really rate Abus's decision equity against a guy like Strickland. I think if this gets a decision, we pretty much know that Strickland's game plan was put into effect. He succeeded, and he just kept on jabbing Abus back and forth. Not saying that it's not existent, but I would cap his decision equity closer to like 20%, if anything. So scorecards no action. I'll give this as a free bet. I got it at minus 140, laid it for 1.4 units. And I think it's a solid look. I do think Abus wins this fight via knockout early on, just due to how bad Strickland got knocked out against Pereira. I think the same thing can happen here with a dynamic kickboxer in a similar manner. Not comparing the two guys by any means, because one is miles ahead of the other, but Abus does have power, and he can wrestle. So, yeah, give me Abus scorecards no action, and I don't have to worry about a decision.
Strickland spent the last few weeks getting punched in the head by Alex Pereira. Who told him that was a plus EV decision? I just don't understand.
You're asking me. But Liam, thank you so much for hopping on the show. I really appreciate it. Tell the people again where they could find you and what you have going on.
Anytime, my brother. You know that for me, a minute is at least 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I tried my very best, but I just can't help myself. I'm a loquacious individual. God bless you all. I hope that you guys enjoyed the fight talk. I know that I certainly did. Nothing to plug, brother, except the podcast. If you guys want to check it out, Spotify, iTunes, things like that. Liam Picks Fights presents. Very easy to find. I appreciate the support. All the shows that I do on YouTube get uploaded right there for my audio head. So appreciate the support. That's what I'm trying to grow right now.
And I appreciate everyone for commenting so much today. The chat was active. Appreciate all of you guys for watching live, and looking forward to doing this again next week with another guest. But until then, we'll be back.